Hey there everyone, and welcome back to my little creative and crafty corner of YouTube. My name is Sandra, and today we are going to be talking about color. I love color. Honestly, color theory was one of my favorite courses in college, and I am going to bring a little bit of that knowledge to you guys here today. I don't want to make this like really boring and like some huge color theory lesson. I'm going to do this in two parts. Today we're going to talk about a color wheel, and before you go away, before you run for the hills screaming, I know color wheels aren't necessarily the most exciting thing we can talk about, but it is valuable to know the basics behind color theory for your creative projects to be their absolute colorful best, right? But mainly learning how to mix your own paint colors is valuable in a couple of different ways. One, you can actually save a lot of money that way. I only ever buy red, yellow, blue, black and white paint, and then I mix all of my own colors. Now, keep in mind, I have been doing this for many years, and it takes practice, just like anything else takes practice, right? So don't get discouraged at first, and don't expect to learn all of this overnight. It is a pretty complex thing, but I want you guys to take it step by step and, just have fun with it, like with everything else. Two, if you know how to mix your own colors, yes, it's going to save you money in the long run, but then also it gives you more control and more freedom of creative freedom of what you're doing with your projects, whether you're painting on a canvas or whether you're creating a cool craft and you want to come up with just the right color of pink or orange or whatever. You will know how to do that without having to run out and depend on only what you see in the stores available on the shelves. So as we get into this color wheel that I'm going to make with you guys today, I want you to keep a couple of things in mind. And you're going to hear me if you watch anything I do now or going forward. You are going to hear what I have always told all of my students, young and adult alike, children and adults alike. It doesn't have to look exactly like mine, okay? Color wheels, if you Google color wheels, you're going to find several different examples of what that may look like. And that can range from the tones of the colors that they're using to, their own personal color wheel according to what they're using it for. Also keep in mind that when you get like a printed color wheel, it is going to look different than one that you paint. A lot of times the colors are lightened to show more emphasis. And that is a whole other thing we'll get into later. So you'll notice on the color wheel that I create today with you guys, it's going to be very subtle, the color changes, because we're using just the colors straight out of the tube, and I will get into all that and talk about that as it gets started on the actual mixing. And then in video 2, we're going to talk about how to lighten and how to create neutral colors. So I don't want to overwhelm you all at once. So today we're going to talk about the primary colors, red, yellow, blue, okay, and how you can use those to mix everything else. We're going to talk about the secondary colors, orange, green, and violet, otherwise known as purple. And we're going to talk about the tertiary colors, which are variations of those secondary colors by mixing a secondary and a primary color. If that sounds too complicated, please don't get discouraged. Trust me, okay? Embrace the process. Trust me on this. If you can start practicing this, you are going to thank yourself in the long run as an artist, as a creative person. I promise. I don't know why I'm clapping. So color theory is a very technical, artsy-fartsy kind of process, but here's what I want you guys to keep in mind with this. I don't want you to see this as something that you have to become quote-unquote perfect at, or that you have to do right. Those things are never really in my art language. I was fortunate in my college life to be surrounded by professors that were not so rigid as some of the things that I have heard. I did have a couple that I'm not a fan of, okay? And I have seen things in my life experience, but just keep in mind, this is a tool. That's how I like to see all of the theory when it comes to art, as far as like the elements of art, the principles of design, all of those things. Those are tools to have in your toolkit in case you run into an issue with what you're working on. It is a way for you to problem solve if you hit kind of a bump in the road, so to speak. So without any more of me rambling and trying to encourage you to embrace this whole color mixing process, let's just jump into it and get into the mixing of the colors. So for my color wheel today, I am using this Strathmore Bristol paper. It is a vellum Bristol. It's one of my favorites for many, many uses, for paint, for color pencil, for pen, all of those things. Now, if you have a compass, you are welcome to use a compass to create your big circle. I am just tracing a bowl here to show that if you don't have that, it's okay. You can use a large lid or a bowl. If you find it even easier to work with, that's great. Use what you have. And I'm just going to start by dividing our circle into 4 quarters. So if you have a compass, that little center part will have a little tiny hole for you to reference. If not, just do your best to get it centered as much as possible. So in our quarters, we are creating sort of a V shape. And you can see where I'm putting a couple of dots. It makes it look like it's pretty equidistant apart. If it's not absolutely perfect, don't stress. This is about the color process. Do not get hung up on trying to make your color wheel absolutely super perfect. Okay, but do try to get those little pie-shaped pieces, you know, pretty much equal as much as possible, because it'll just make it easier to look at for you in the long run. So I'm just using this color wheel to show you that the red, yellow, and blue are equidistant from each other, and you can start your wheel wherever you want to. I'm starting with the blue up here, and I do recommend writing down your blue, your yellow, and your red, your primary colors. You want 3 little pie spaces in between your blue and your yellow and your blue and your red. So there should be 3 spaces in between each of your primary colors, basically. Write those on there. It just makes it easier when you start painting. You don't have to think about it. So something else that you can do is, depending on the paint that you're using, if you always use the same kind of paint, you'll get used to it pretty quickly. But if you're using different types of paint, it might not be a bad idea as you're learning color mixing to just make some different swatch charts or color wheels for your different paints so you know how they look, because different paints will look a little differently. So I'm using these golden acrylics, and I will list the colors below just to make it easier so you don't feel like you have to pause on there. And we're going straight out of the tube. I ended up using a smaller brush. That's kind of what I was showing there. I realized the brush was a little too chunky for those little teeny tiny corners at the center. But just taking my paint and in a thin layer, adding my blue to that first little blue slice. And you'll notice also as you're doing this, this is a great way to kind of get to know your paints, because you'll see how the blue is actually a little bit translucent. So it's definitely going to need a second coat, but we're going to let that one dry. Going in with the red, again, straight out of the tube. Now, making notes like this, writing down which paints you're using and the exact colors that you're using, like this is a cadmium medium red. You know, there are other reds available as well. So it's just helpful to see the colors on their own. And ultimately that will help you. The more you work on mixing colors, it'll help you to see what you're working with. So both of these definitely need a second coat. And while we're waiting for those to dry, we're going to go in with our yellow. Going to clean that water, because especially for yellow, we don't want it picking up any different tones in there, like the blue. It wasn't that dirty, but it's best to be safe when we're doing something like this. We don't want to make all this effort and then end up frustrated because our yellow is a little dingy from the blue, right? That would just be frustrating. All right, so here are our primary colors, all set, all layered up and lovely, and just take those in. This is the beginning of it all. So you guys, seriously, when I say you can use the 3 primary colors to make all the other colors, this is where the magic is going to start happening. I'm going to show you how to do that next. We're going into our secondary colors. So secondary colors are going to be your green and your violet, which also known as purple. If you want to be fancy and use proper art terms, you would say violet. And then red and yellow make our orange. So go ahead and write those in on your color wheel. So we're going to start with our green, and green is made by mixing yellow and blue. Now, this is where I'm going to tell you less is more initially when you're doing this. Until you get used to your paint and how to mix the colors, you don't want to put globs and globs of it on there because you want to have a little more control. And this acrylic paint goes a pretty long way. So you can see I put about equal amounts of yellow and blue, and that is actually working pretty well for this green. You want to make sure that you're using a palette knife or something. Do you see how all that blue is still coming out from the bottom? So just kind of smush that palette knife down, make sure all the paint is completely mixed. Your paint isn't completely mixed into your color until you don't see any more streaks of yellow or blue. That's how you know you're finished mixing your green. So ultimately, I end up pretty happy with this green. I think it's a pretty good mid-green, I guess you could say. And we're just going to paint our green spot and fill that in. Now you'll see this one, I think I end up doing 2 coats as well. Take your time with it. You can even see where this is super sped up and there are still slow moments, but yeah, there's our green. So orange, we're going to mix yellow and red. And now red tends to overpower the yellow. Yellow tends to be a little kind of fragile, like she disappears a little bit sometimes. So you'll see I use just a little bit more yellow than I did red, and you can always adjust. I find orange is one of those tricky ones. I always end up wanting my yellow, orange, more yellow. Anyway, it's all about practice, right? Even me still. So we're going to get a nice good yellow, or a good orange rather. Make sure all of the yellow, all of the red is mixed in there. Once you have an orange that you're happy with, you're going to paint that as well. You can see I'm adding a little more yellow right here off from the side. So this is why I say don't put gobs and gobs of paint on your palette. You can always add a little more at a time. That's going to give you more control, especially for this where we're just doing a color wheel and we're filling in, we're painting in smaller spaces. Like obviously once you get the hang of this and once you have, you know what you're doing and you're working on a big painting, you would want to mix more paint. But just for learning purposes, we're going to be sparing with our materials because they ain't free, right? All right, so now to get our violet, we're mixing red and blue, and I'm going in with about equal parts of this as well. And again, as far as how much to use of each color, that's going to depend on the paint that you're using, even down to like the brand and the tones and the colors of the paint that you're using. Now, one thing you'll notice with the violet, okay, it is very dark because you've got this red and you've got this blue, and when they get together, they just often create this very dark color. So something else to remember with acrylic paint is I'm just adding a little more blue until I get something that I feel like is a little more mid violet tone versus like a red violet, and just trying to get it where I want it to be. But you'll notice with this, like with acrylic paint, like once you get it on the paper, it's going to look different than when it's on the palette. And also acrylic paint tends to dry just a smidge darker than what it looks like when it's wet. So these are all things to take into account. Again, these are all things that you kind of learn as you go. The lighting here, not super great. So this is a trust the process moment. I'm just going in there and knowing that this is my violet. Okay. And that ultimately you will see the end result. So now keeping this paint, the idea, if you have a lot of paint mixed, save that for when you mix your next ones for your tertiary colors. And your tertiary colors are going to be in all of these little in-between spaces right here. Okay, so we're going to take the green we already mixed, the violet we already mixed, the orange we already mixed, and we're going to create tertiary colors with them. All right. So what we're going to do now is write in between the blue and the green, you're going to write blue, green. Okay, so you're going to take your green and add some blue to it. That's going to be your blue, green. And then between the green and the yellow, you're going to make your yellow green, because the tertiary colors are based on the secondary colors. Okay, so we're doing blue green, yellow green, all right, and then we're doing the orange. We're gonna do yellow orange and red orange. Okay, we're starting with our tertiary or our secondary colors to create the tertiaries. And then basically what you're gonna do is take the secondary colors that you already mixed, and you're going to add a bit more of one of the primary colors. That's what the tertiaries are. So you're taking, for your red orange, you're going to take your orange, you're going to add a bit more red. And the same thing for the violet. You're going to take the violet that you already mixed, and you're either going to add more red to make it red violet, or you're going to add more blue to make it blue violet. And once you get this general idea, everything else in color mixing just kind of works from there and starts to go from there. All right, so now here is my green, and you will see that my green is kind of crusty. There was not enough of it on there, and it took me too long, so I had to go in and mix up another green to match the green that I already had on my color wheel. So this might seem scary. And again, keep in mind, I've been doing this for a long time. So don't be intimidated if you feel like you can't get it absolutely perfect green. Here, I'm adding the blue to one side. I'm adding the yellow to the other side of the green that I just mixed and divided. And now you can really see the kind of difference, how one is much more yellow, one is much more blue, but they are both in the green family. So here we go. We're just going to paint that in. We're going to add the yellow green, and because of that yellow being rather translucent, and remember the blue was also a little bit translucent, definitely a couple of layers going on here again. Take your time with this, all right? Anyway, if you don't manage to mix your green, absolutely, if you don't make those secondary colors right on perfect, just take a look at your original color, and you can see how the yellow green has a bit more yellow and the blue green has a bit more blue, okay? So I am going to share a side thought about all of these tertiary colors real quick. And we're going to do a little exercise. Now you can do this if you want to. You don't absolutely have to, but it could be something fun to play with. I am just going to create a little row of boxes to show you guys how much variation there really is when you're mixing colors, and just to kind of remind you that there is no right or wrong way for your color wheel. Use this as a learning process. So I'm basically just making 1-inch squares. I absolutely love this little clear ruler. I have had it since college. She's a little beat up, a little rough around the edges. Some of the edges have seen better days, but I love this ruler because you can see right through it, and it comes in these like 1-inch increments, so it makes it super easy to make these 1-inch boxes. So if you can find a ruler like this for activities like this, it makes life so much easier just to get all that stuff on there. But anyway, here is my first little row of boxes. So we are starting with this green. All right, and I'm just going to paint my green in there, and then I'm going to gradually start adding yellow and just go down the row with that. So I've got my base green, and then for the next box, I'm going to just add a little bit of yellow to it. Just a tiny little bit, because we're going for subtle variations here. And then just keep doing that all the way down the row. So you will notice that yellow green can mean many different things as we go along with this. So if you feel like your yellow green for your color wheel is not as dramatic as you want it to be, that's something to keep in mind for next time. Right. And this also kind of comes down to, like, if you are in school and teachers are expecting certain things for assignments, maybe, and they're like, oh, that's not yellow green enough. This is all stuff that you just kind of get the hang of. I am still a big believer in a little bit at a time. Kind of think about it like if you're seasoning food, right? You add a little bit of salt. Maybe you need to add a little more salt later, rather than adding a boatload of salt that you can't take out down the road. Because if you start adding gobs of color and then you have to add more of another color because you've overcorrected a bit, and then you're using a ton of your product, a ton of your materials, and that just becomes overwhelming, and it becomes expensive too. And then you end up with like a whole, you know, bowl of green paint you may never use. So here we're going the opposite direction. Okay, so here I'm taking the yellow, and instead of adding yellow to the green, I'm adding the green to the yellow. I just wanted to show you like how that shifts things a little bit, right? So now we've got this yellow green that is very, very yellow with just a little bit of green in it. And now I'm just going to keep adding the green to the yellow, just like I did on the top row, right? Except we did it a little different. And so now I'm gradually adding that green. So that just, I wanted to give you an idea of how that changes the effects that you get, so that you know how to have a little more control depending on how light, you know, you want your colors to be, how yellow or how red or how green or how whatever color you're mixing. Okay. All right. So now we're going in with our red violet. So again, had to remix my violet, and I added a bit more red than I did blue. And now you can really see the difference in that warmth that's coming out in the violet, right? So now we're doing that, and we're going to take a little bit of that red violet that I mixed and adding it to the blue, because I want it much more blue this time. So an emphasis on the blue with just a little bit of red until I get something that has me feeling happy. Okay, so here we go. Mix, mix, mix. And finally, I think I added a little bit more, and then we're going to put it down. Now, the other thing to do is, if you're not sure, especially as you're beginning, you can put a few brush strokes down and see what it actually looks like on the paper compared to the previous color. And if you feel like you need a little bit more of one or the other primary color, then do that. All right, so now, another side thought about the darker colors like violet. It's so hard to see these, and especially when you're getting started, you can be like, that is not the purple that I love and know, okay? Who is this violet? She's not looking purple. So here I'm just adding a tiny little bit of white paint. Now we're not going to do this for our color wheel, because again, the color wheel, we just want to see what the paints are going to mix like, how they're going to work with each other straight out of the tubes. So I added a little box here, just doing a little bit of white paint, because the white paint is going to kind of bring those colors out. It's going to lighten everything and just sort of make it a little easier for you to see what's actually happening. And then I added a little bit more, and I apologize for the lighting. This actually, in this lighting, it looks so much darker than it actually is. Toward the end, I'll show you in better daylight. I apologize, my light glitched on me, and I'm doing my best to work with natural daylight for the short hours that we have it until it gets dark at 4:30. So I was trying to show kind of a side by side. You can see how it changes having that white in there a little bit. So now our final color, we've got our orange. I mixed up orange. I am so messy. I don't even know where the heck that came from. So pardon me while I go wash my hand and come back. But here we have the oranges, and I just mixed another orange. I'm putting it against some white so it's a little easier to see. All right, that white background kind of helps to see the differences. And so yeah, just like the rest of them, you get your orange, you add a little more yellow to one, a little more red to the other one. And here is the completed color wheel. So I'm happy with it. Again, that yellow orange, I always wish I had more yellow in it when it comes down to it, but here we are. You kind of get the idea. So you'd think after all these years, I would just make it really, really yellow orange. So trying to salvage the last little bit of daylight that we have. You can see all the shadows, sorry, but here you can see the differences when everything is dry. Again, depending on which direction you mix, if you're adding yellow to the green or green to the yellow, how that affects the mixing process. And here are the purples with a little bit more white. Okay, so now that you have made a color wheel and we have talked about all the basics, I hope you're feeling less intimidated by this whole process. If you're feeling more overwhelmed, I really, really hope you're not, but if you're feeling more overwhelmed about it, just take a deep breath and break it down step by step. Keep in mind that I am trying to keep this video in like 30 minutes time frame so that people don't think it's way too much, but this took days for me to complete between mixing and letting dry and relayering and all of those things. So anytime you're watching videos like this, don't think that you're supposed to get it all done in the time frame that you see a video doing these things. There's lots of editing involved, lots of speeding up, lots of time lapse kind of things happening. Okay, so don't be intimidated. Don't feel like you can't do it. All right, if this was your very first ever go at it, be proud of yourself that you are at this and you are learning, and you will continue to learn more. Okay. So the last thing I want to leave you with on this whole topic of conversation, anytime we're talking about like theory, the elements and principles of art and design, and we're talking about learning all of these techniques and things, I want you guys to start thinking about these things as tools to have in your toolkit for when you run into a struggle. Okay, I think I already mentioned that, but it bears repeating, because this isn't about people can master a technique and you're still kind of left with wanting, right? Or people can like have what some consider not to be great technique, and it can leave meaningful impact. So like, get out of your head as if you are one of those people who thinks there's a right or wrong way to create, or there's a right or wrong version of art. Okay. Like, we just got to get rid of that and be nicer to each other as artists too. Okay. Now, doesn't mean you can't have your opinions. I'm just saying, let go of those blocks and just get your hands in there and start doing the things with those little digits of yours. Okay. The other thing about this is thinking about it as tools in your toolkit. You're not always going to have to think about exactly how to mix these colors or what all of these things are. Like, initially, yes, anytime you're learning a new skill, think about a job you were trained for, something you learned in school, or, a sport you were doing, or a musical instrument is a great example, right? Initially, you are learning all of the notes, you are learning what goes where your finger placement is on the piano keyboard, and you're thinking like that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and eventually you're just connecting, you're reading the notes, you're playing. And that's how this is as well. You're probably initially going to have to remember, if this is all new to you, that red and yellow make orange, and if you want it to be more yellow orange, add the red to the yellow. Like, those are all things you're gonna have to think of at first, but down the road it becomes internalized and intuitive, and your brain just starts to click. So when you're working on something, it's not going to rob you of your creativity. I think sometimes we get concerned that if we start learning technical things, if you're a very intuitive artist, that maybe it's going to hold you back or hinder you, but it can only ultimately help you out in the long run. Okay. If you do feel yourself getting frustrated, take a step back. Just take a step back. That's all I can say. That's a good rule of thumb for life in general anyway, right? So today we talked about the basics, and we got our basic color wheel. And then in the next video, I'm going to teach you guys how to mix those neutral colors, all of those browns and grays and things, not only using the black and white paint to create value, but also in mixing complementary colors. That gets fun because it always seems scary at first, but then something magical happens. So anyway, I'm going to do that in the next video. I hope you guys learned something from this. Let me know how your color mixing is going. And if you'd like to see more technical videos like this, I would be happy to share. So go forth, be creative and crafty, do lots of creative and crafty things. I will see you guys soon in the next video. Take care.